CE Employment and REM Committee, the open part of the agenda. And we have a full house, but we have one person, that Councillor Mcpherson, for lateness. Is that correct there, Dave?
That's correct.
That's terrific. So that's the apologies. I formally move that Councillor Mcpherson for lateness, seconded by you, Katarina. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against, carried. The confirmation of the agenda, it has been circulated and it's in front of you. It's on page 2 of the typed hardbound copy. Are there any questions you have of it, or are you happy with it?
I'll move.
Happy to second.
Okay, it's moved by Councillor Quayle, seconded by Councillor Mcpherson. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against, carried. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon? Morning, Nick. Disclosure of interest, I have not been notified of any. Has anyone disclosures of interest they'd like to list to this formal meeting? There are none. We will then proceed to the next item, and that is in regard to the, this is a very good paper as well, may I say. And it's page 5, and here Nick is just in time to present this to us. Nick, we're at your hands. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction. So, Nick, can you put your...
And just bring it right close to you, Nick, the mic. Just bring the mic right close.
Thank you very much.
Better and better, to be honest.
Okay, catch my breath. Good morning all,
Good morning.
and thank you very much for the introduction. So the key role continuity planning paper, I'm sure you've had a chance to pre-read it. It's an important exercise that we undertake to have a good look at our business resilience around the risk of loss of key people from important roles. We look really about assessing what are those key positions, and that is quite a dynamic assessment. You know, priorities do change, and therefore the number of key roles that we have does vary from time to time. And then we look at what's our workforce resilience to the gap of that role. So do we have people with the skill sets, capability, the experience to step up and provide the support we need in a critical role should that be necessary? And we do that with the concept of ready now or ready next. So immediately able to step into the role, or able to step into it, but may require some development to be fully effective. And we've done the exercise quite recently to have a good look at our current state. We see, in our perception, good depth overall around the organisation. Partly we think actually of some of the investment in recent years in both the leadership program and general staff development. So the depth we have there is sufficient in most cases. We do have 13 of the 55 key roles that do not have a ready now or ready next option that we've identified to date. Now, for those, some of them are suitable to go to the general market to find suitable people for. So if you think, for example, some of our finance and business services positions, which are important and have very and often very critical knowledge of our business that we rely on, the generic skill set is available in the market, so we can recruit into those positions or work with consultancies for short-term cover should that be necessary. We have a small number, 5, where we don't feel that is likely to be the case because they're more specialised and associated with local government work. So an example of that would be, for example, our group controller in civil defence, or some of our very specialised sort of business intelligence type roles. So for those, the discussion at the executive was around a couple of things, a couple of options that would be drawn on if it became necessary. So one would be double hatting, the concept of actually spreading a person across 2 positions because they've got sufficient capability to do so. Generally a short-term solution, but provides a cover in the interim. Alternatively, collaborating with some of our local government counterparts. So again, the civil defence position might be a good example of that, where there are people with expertise elsewhere that we could draw on, particularly if there was an emergency. And then also working through opportunities with recruitment. So as we recruit through natural attrition, ensuring that we keep those positions front of mind and we look to build resilience into our recruitment decision making, so we bring in people that could provide cover overall over time. At the moment, so we'll continue to monitor the data. We're shifting into individual development conversations right now, particularly about those Ready Next people. And as we begin developing our next generation of leaders, again, making sure we're thinking about the future with who we develop and why. And finally, using those vacancies very carefully so we recruit for depth into our organisation. So hopefully that paper provides some information and obviously questions are welcomed.
Nick, I want to, and Chris, may I say, Mr. CEO, may I compliment you on this. I think being on the front foot is the way to go. And I, in the last couple of weeks, been reading a book on the history of main freight. And it's the most inspiring book I've read for many years. And it's called Ready, Fire, Aim. So it's not Ready, Aim, Fire, it's Ready, Fire, Aim. And it really talks about being proactive, looking at his succession plan, right from the founder himself, but mainly the key people around the world. And man, this is exactly what main freight, which I think going to be one of the great freight organisations of the world, not just Australasia, and the way, the importance they talk about culture and also ensuring that they have a succession plan in emergencies. And man, it stood the test of time. And after right against the big boys like Toll, the likes of Owens and so forth, and most of those companies are now under the control of culture, but forward planning and looking at risk. Yep. I compliment you on what you've done, Chris, and you, Nick, as well. We're in your hands, and welcome to the meeting, Paul, our esteemed consultant. Paul, would you like to make comment?
You're on mute.
I know you may be suffering from COVID, but just click the button. We can't lip read.
Sorry, common sense is the first thing to go. Thanks, Nick and Chris, for the paper. And I know there's a heavy focus here on succession and covering potential vacancies. I guess the other ingredient implicit in this work, though, is that you're identifying your high potential people and you're engaging with them and you're setting out to retain them by talking to them about where their careers could go, because typically these are reasonably ambitious people. One measure of success of this, I guess, would be the rate at which you migrate people from being ready next to being ready now. Any comments on your success, your tracking of that? Because that's ready now. If you look at the ready now gaps, you've got some big gaps, don't you? SPI 6 people, CCS 10 people, and so on. RUD 8 people. Gaps, I should say. So what really matters, to my mind, is the rate at which you're converting the ready next to ready now. Thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And look, this is something that we have been actively discussing in the executive. And of course, with the dynamic market where we haven't been able to recruit into some of those key roles, and where we have lost a few people, it's kind of live. And so we're trying to get that whole plan. I think a bit later, I'll probably, when we talk about KPIs for next year, I'll talk about the employee value proposition that we have as an organisation to try and get people in. But we are trying to grow our people. And we're trying to work out what are the barriers that we have in place that stop people growing and might even want them to maybe look to move elsewhere to be able to grow. And that's a key part of it. And moving them from that ready next into ready now is very key. Look, I think if I emphasise one thing, there are a few roles which are probably more difficult to get someone from ready now into ready next into ready now. And that's the ones that are probably more likely to keep us awake at night. And so they're the ones where we're particularly wanting, thinking about, and look, as an example in the finance area, making sure we've got depth in there, we build up depth. And in this world where you've got to grow it internally, how do we get people we can grow them fast and remove those barriers? Nick, you might want to add to some of the discussions we've been having.
Yeah, and it's a great question, Paul. No, I appreciate you raising that. I mean, one of the measures we do have of success has been a very strong internal appointment rate. So roughly 40% of our vacancies have been filled internally over the last 12 months. And that suggests to me anyway that we're doing the right job in terms of preparing people for those step changes in their roles. Now, I don't have the metric you actually asked for, which is the transition from Ready Next to Ready Now. But that is something I can have a good look at, because we're constantly looking for those good lead measures of how we assess performance. And I think that's a useful lead for us. But overall, yeah, we're seeing a strong performance. I did actually have a look in the previous version of our continuity planning over the weekend and just scanned the names of the people on that list and checked. And a number of them have been appointed both into tier 2 and 3 positions over the last a year to 18 months. So I think we've been, again, quite successful there. Though I couldn't give you a metric off the top of my head to demonstrate that.
Thank you.
The first questioner, and Marina, Councillor Sori, and kia ora, Pamela, would you like to pose your question and comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the paper, Nick and Chris. Really interesting to see this level of assessment. I think it's really helpful in giving us a picture of where the organization is at. Just had a question around the double hatting. What do we have any view or approach or policy around how long we might let that situation continue for? I know that I've seen that put into place, particularly with some of the ICM rules in the time that I've been here, and just was wondering if we've got some thought processes around how long we would allow that to continue, and how do we look after the well-being of the individuals, because people who are willing to put their hand up for that, I know that they'll go the extra mile. I just don't want them to go so far that they burn themselves out. So how do we manage that?
Yeah, again, a great question. And we have seen a few instances where we've used it to some success, I think, in the past, but it certainly is a risk management tool, not necessarily a preferred outcome to have people covering more than one position. I mean, by their nature, these jobs are very demanding, and often the incumbent with their substantive position is already undertaking a large workload. So in terms of your question, timeframes as short as we can get them. Generally, it's aligned with how long it takes to recruit and appoint through your general recruitment approaches. We average around 40 to 45 days per vacancy to fill a vacancy at the moment. For a critical role, that could be longer because they tend to be quite specialised. So that sort of timeframe, 1 to 2 months, would be reasonable. If we're getting much beyond 4 to 6 months, I think that at that point we need to really begin exploring whether it's sustainable for a person to double hat. And we have had a few of the early conversations around that in the past, but we've been able to manage it through provision of generally 2 ITs and other people stepping up to share some of the workload requirements on the people who are taking on an extra load.
And look, if I could just add, Councillor Story, thanks for asking that question, because it is the very real issue that we have with it. And as Nick says, as short as possible, but we are mindful that in the market we're in at the moment, some of these roles are very difficult to recruit in at the high level. So, but what we are blessed with is with some really high calibre capability in our organisation, especially in the senior levels. And I think sometimes maybe double hatting isn't always a word that we might use, but we might transfer somebody across to another role for an interim period, and then where it's easier to backfill their role, just because some of our senior people do have capability of working across the organisation.
Mm-hmm. I do want us to ensure that there are safe opportunities for people to feed back. If they're in this double hatting or whatever you want to call it, if they're in that situation, I want us to ensure that there's some safe ways that they can feed back whether or not they're finding themselves stretched, and if there's some creative ways that we can help support people. I understand the recruitment process and the marketplace out there, Chris, and I know it's challenging. I just want to make sure we're looking after people in the interim. Thank you.
And thanks for that comment. It's really appreciated, actually. I
concur to Councillor Story. Welcome to members of the meeting, being Councillor Kneebone and Councillor White that's come on board. And the next questioner and comment is Councillor Mcpherson. Good morning, Andrew.
Morena, Chair. this is an interesting paper. My experience tells me that when key talent leave companies, that companies change subtly, and so I'm of the view that no one is indispensable, except in the area as a regulator. My question is, when I looked at your identify business critical roles, I'm assuming that, Nick, you've looked at those people who, if they left this organisation, we would not be able to fulfil our key roles in terms of regulation. The example you quoted was in finance. You've got such a broad and deep relationship with large accounting firms that I'm sure, you know, we could hold our breath and get through. But what I'm trying to understand in my mind is, of those 5 people you talk about, how many of them, if they left tomorrow, would we fundamentally not be able to do business? Because they're the at the sharp end of this for me. That's the first part of my question. The second part of my question is, I think this paper assumes that we've got an FTE relationship with key talent that we want to hang around. And I just want to understand, to what extent have you explored, because of the issues raised by the chair and the chief executive, to what extent have you explored alternate business models that are going to keep us in business but don't necessarily require an FTE relationship? So those are the 2 questions. Thank you, Chair.
Good questions, Nick.
Yes, Councillor, yes, we certainly look at, I mean, the roles that fit the definition of a key role are quite carefully considered, and aspects like relationships, strategic value, type of expertise, knowledge, etc., are all factors that we use to make that decision. And you'll see there, we've got key roles across all the directorates. If you were to put a microscope to that definition, you'd probably suggest some are more critical than others, but we use this exercise slightly more broadly to help us with our planning. But certainly a number of the regulatory roles fall into that category. In a number of cases for those roles, and in fact some of the ICM roles too, we have reasonable succession and depth of talent in those areas. But reasonable probably isn't enough for us, and that's why we constantly keep on looking at what do we do to recruit the right people who have the potential. We develop them and we try and build our pipeline so we have resilience, noting that key talent by definition are the people that generally are most able to access work elsewhere, and will be most in demand in the market. So they are the most vulnerable part of our workforce. When Chris talks later to his KPIs and he talks around talent, I think that's when we begin tapping into the talent work that we've got planned and coming into in the new year as well.
If I could just comment on the alternative business models, because it's an interesting question and it's something that's been very alive with us in the executive just recently. And in that regulatory space you refer to, it is something that we're being forced to look at the moment, because there's only so much work you can do with new people who require training, and we're looking at capacity externally to fulfil some of it. Of course, the lens is we want to provide value to our ratepayers, both in terms of quality of decision making and in terms of cost to say a consent applicant, to ensure that they're getting good value for money. So there's a whole lot being taken into it. There's actually a bit of a review in the resource use area, in the sort of consenting compliance area, as to the best business model, whether we can project manage outsourced work or whether it's best to internalise it. That's active at the moment, and we've done that in other parts of the business as well. Of course, in the planning space, the development of regulations, that's been something we've been forced to outsource some of these key roles in recent times, just because of the inability of the market to provide. So
Chair, if I may question the Chief Executive a little bit further on that, please.
You proceed.
So Chris, that's an interesting response, and I want to delve into the examples we've got afoot at the moment, National Policy Statement, Freshwater Management, recent High Court decision in relation to the Coastal Management Plan, and where wetlands and the definition of wetlands, etc., and where they fit, and how the National Policy Statement and Freshwater Management integrates with our thinking around the Coastal Management Plan. Now, every regional council in New Zealand will be sitting down and grappling with that High Court decision. And it strikes me that it's just ridiculous that you've got, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 very highly paid planning type people who are grappling with the same conversation. So you say you've been thinking about interesting new models. I think you've got so much evidence around you now to take the bull by the horns, go to Northland Regional Council, go to Bay of Plenty Regional Council, go to Horizons, talk to those chief executive and say, look guys, we're grappling with the same issue. These are very expensive talent that we use to have these debates. Because to be honest with you, I suspect each of the regional councils having that talent on an FTE basis on their payroll is a luxury we're not going to be able to afford for too much longer. So Chair, I think this is a great paper, but what I want to see, it's very much Nick cranked the handle stuff, with all due respect. What I want to see is a bit more strategic challenge to us as a council, but also as Local Government New Zealand, because I think we're not going to be able to swim fast enough to employ all the people we need to deal with the deluge of change that's coming at us from this government, and that's just one small example of what's going on in this council. So, you know, what I'm looking for is, so what is the breakthrough new model? Thank you, Chair.
Look, thank you. Interesting comments, and just a couple of responses. One is, well, we are working with other councils with that matter. Interestingly, there's been another wetland decision from the Environment Court against Greater Wellington Regional Council, which actually went against national guidance, against the MFE guidance. And so, you know, when you get government developing new policy with guidance and the court doesn't uphold it, it makes it quite tricky. But what the regional sector is doing, and it's not just a handful of councils, the regional sector is trying to deal with some of these matters. They put a chief science advisor in now across the sector to give advice to all the councils on some of the science matters. We're beginning to look at it in different areas in the recognition there's not enough talent to go around. So those discussions are live and well at the regional sector group type of discussion level.
So Chris, I think my closing comment through you, Chair, would be, I don't think we should feel pressure to own this resource. I think we shouldn't be religious about having to have an employment relationship with these people. What we need is a business relationship with these people in some form or another. And I'm hoping that, Nick, you feel empowered enough to be able to intellectualise and then come forward to the council or through this committee with some I've been thinking moments. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks. Paul, would you like to just make some comments on the items and matters that have been raised?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I'll leave Andrew's great point where it sits. Nick, there's nothing more annoying when you run a model like this than losing one or more of your ready now or ready next people. So it might be helpful if you could just talk to the committee a little bit about what kind of tactics you've got in place to make sure that we pay particular attention to retaining the ready now and the ready next folks. You know, what can they expect by way of above midpoint payments or differential investment in their training, or having a mentor, or getting work opportunities maybe that others don't get, just so that we stay engaged and don't lose them.
Yeah, briefly on that point, Paul, we do a number of things across the topics you've mentioned. The remuneration system, of course, is designed to recognise and reward performance, and these are the group that are obviously amongst our higher performers in the organisations. That features in terms of their remuneration opportunities. Training has been a really important focus for our Ready Next in particular, where a number of those people have graduated through our leadership investment, but also we're appropriate into technical training and development and the skills that they require for the particular roles that we have identified in our continuity planning. Beyond that, the culture work, which we're going to come on to shortly, of course, is fundamental to how we attract and retain, but also provide an environment for good people to be their best. And we know that giving them opportunity to own the work that they've been involved in, have a real clear link of their work through to outcomes, and be recognised and given feedback to that effect is fundamental to the retention of talent. And then amongst that too, the quality of our leadership. People tend to hang around where they've got good leadership, effective leadership, and access to people that can help them develop in their skill sets. So yes, it helps. I mean, we can't avoid the occasional loss of some of these people. It does happen. Part of the reason why we look for more than one key role successor, if possible. And for a number of these positions, there are 2, 3, and in 1 or 2 cases, a few more people with the right skill sets to step up. So again, we try and build resilience at that end as well. But there is a longer term piece of work here around employee value proposition, around talent management that again, I think will be fundamental for us going forward. We've got more work to do in that space because it's a really competitive environment and becoming more competitive rather than less so in the foreseeable future. So we're aware of that.
Good response. Councillor Quayle?
Yes, thank you. I think it's important, which has been highlighted by a previous councillor, about feedback from those staff. The resources that are applied to these people who might be under pressure, are they getting the tools that they require? We should be asking them, you know, whether they have those tools. And I've raised before that the issue of machine learning, technology application, all those things need to be delved into to provide better tools so that the employees feel more valued, that they have the best tools available to do their job. And that can be in particularly around RUD and a number of those other areas where both machine learning and technology applications are worthwhile and can make the difference between working for this organisation or working for another. So, you know, I want to see that maybe reported on. Particularly, I like the CEO's comment about the regional sector group also coming to the fore. If we could have in reports in the future what areas of work are being pursued by the regional sector group, so that we can get an overview of how we're addressing our challenges. And I think that will help us as governors. Thanks.
Thanks, Barry. I'm going to draw this to a conclusion. Excellent inputs from all. I just think that, my view, this council, in the 2.5 years I've been chair, I think it's an exemplar to any other council in this country, whether it be regional, district, or any territorial, because we've actually walked the talk with internal appointments and class internal appointments, and they still had the rigour of looking at the national and international availability on the recruiting process. Example was Vaughan, hard act to follow. We've taken and employed Chris. That was 2 rounds, and man, we looked in, well, Australasia-wide, right in the middle of COVID as well. Created a new role in regard to public transport and employed Mark Tamara, Greg in ICM, and Brent has also been in a succession plan that is just not, we like to do it, we've done it. And that's where we walk the talk rather than just talk about it and the nice things. But I do go back to what I've been talking about in regard to Mainfreight. Today they have $1 billion business. And I think there is a lessons to be learned there. I'd ask you to just consider what they've been doing, much like I hope we do in this area, and to continue to actually, they never hire a person, whether it be a forklift driver, unless they have branch manager potential. That's the kind of culture that this company entrust themselves upon. And this organisation, I mean, I've addressed the 525 staff out at Don Roland Centre, and shook the hands of everyone. I thought they were an awesome group that you had employed. And but there's two areas that I think we have got, and I'm not going to mention names, we're in the open section of this meeting, that are also so exceptional that I just think I offline would like to have a talk to Chris and you about it, that I think that, you know, if we lost those, we'll be struggling. And it's not a perfect world, but then again, we also want to be cost effective. So how do you have two equivalent and paying that that person to stay there, and all the time they're waiting for another year, and then they go off to another regional council. So it is a balancing act. We appreciate that. But I like this Ready Now, Ready Next. I think it's repeating the other councillors. They've contributed far more eloquently than I on this. And the regional sector group, Mr. CEO, I think in Wellington are getting stronger and stronger. It's headed by Doug Dieter, chairperson of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. And while they used to use free of cost, but I say Vaughan, that is gone. And, you know, I don't think it's right that one willing council actually have your CEO taken out for kind of one day a week. So I think we should be looking at funding, and that should be raised with them, Mr. CEO, because I think collectively it's a bit like one advantage of Three Waters is we don't need 67 water engineers. And it's the same with regional councils as well. And I think the regional sector group, we funded it more adequately, could actually be a way in which we get excellent centralisation and get world-class, even better persons to actually either fill the breach or to assist us in some of these matters that come from central government. And we all kind of respond, and it's just costing millions of dollars, and I doubt whether many of the papers are read by central government anyway. But perhaps it's another debate, another day. Would someone like to move? Andrew would like to move that, seconded by Katarina. Are there any comments, further comments? There are none. I formally put it that the paper be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Aye. Next item is Nick, is page 10. And that is in regard to the organisational culture survey results. Again, this is not what we all think we're great, but this is actually, hopefully, it's factual. So, Nick, if that's right, Chris, we'll hand over to Nick.
Yeah, look, if I can make a few comments first. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I thought just before Nick opens up, it'd be useful to make a few comments. And I mean, if I was entirely honest, I was actually quite nervous about the survey. You know, we've been doing pulse survey results right through since I've become chief executive, and of course, going into COVID lockdown and most staff working remotely. I wasn't too sure exactly how staff would respond to the environment around them and how they perceived the culture in the organisation. And it's also because previously with Vaughan, you know, when I've been in the executive, we'd worked very hard to try and shift the culture in the organisation. And I think in human synergistics terms that we'd made a sort of a quantum shift, you know, and made a lot of gains. And in a nutshell, I'm really, really happy with the result that we achieved in this culture survey results. Not only have we maintained some of those constructive culture improvements that staff perceive in the organisation, but there have been some gains in areas as well. And so I just thought I'd preface this by saying that I think that I was very happy with the results of the organisation. Moved into a new building, new executive, going into lockdowns and so on. It was a lot of things where there could be a recipe for, you know, culture to maybe have taken a different direction. Having said that, we've worked really, really hard to try and maintain this and to make improvements, and to see that come through was very pleasing. The other comment I'll just make before Nick talks about it in a bit more detail is that the richness of this is we get quite a lot of feedback in the results, and it's been able to pick up those things for where we can really focus on improving the culture. And that's something that we're now starting to run through the organisation, through directorates, through sections, and through individual teams to try and get that feedback where we can make improvements. And I'm sure as we have more staff starting to come back into the organisation, that there's a real opportunity to make further progress. Anyway, over to you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And Chris has covered some of the points I was going to talk to, but far more eloquently than I would have. Culture has been a focus for us since 2017, and you'll know it's there in the corporate plan. It's also part of our risk management framework, recognising that if we get culture right, a number of the other things become a lot more effective. So we'll achieve better customer service, we have a better health and safety record, we'll be more able to attract and retain staff. So a number of things hinge around our effectiveness and development of an effective culture in our workplace. To remind you of the definition we use, we talk about culture being the shared values, norms and expectations that guide organisational members in terms of how they work, how they interact with each other, and how we interact with those people that we provide services to, our customers. And that shared point is really important. So how do we share, how do we behave based on those shared values, norms and expectations? You'll see from the paper we've used quite a few different techniques to develop our culture. The leadership development work's been a key part of that. But including though work with individuals around their capability and building ability for people to be effective in whatever role they happen to be in. So that concept of personal leadership, not just formal leadership. As Chris mentioned, we weren't sure what to expect with this survey, very disrupted couple of years. And what we see using the measurement tool that we've deployed is that we've increased overall in terms of the preferred culture that we're seeking. 2 of the 4 constructed styles. The 4 constructed styles are the ones that we're targeting growth in. 2 of those increased, 1 retains, it didn't decrease, stayed the same, and 1 decreased by 1 percentile point, that being achievement. 3 of the 4 passive defensive styles decreased, with the only increase being under conventional. Conventional is the one, the behaviours around applying rules, staying within guidelines, being careful not to make mistakes. And we think that's probably a reaction to the environment we've been in over the last couple of years. And of the aggressive styles, aggressive defensive styles, again, we saw 3 of those decrease, a decrease being preferred, with only an increase in the perfectionistic style. So overall, we've seen a net gain. These things, as I mentioned, are important for a number of underlying business performance reasons. We're actually sharing the results at the moment. So we began working through the cascade into the organisation a few weeks ago. The real richness comes as you do that. You're talking to results at an organisational level, and that's what you see in the paper today. We have equivalent results at section and in many cases team level as well, and directorate, I should add. And so as we work our way through those differences between those results, the individuals working with their managers begin identifying plans to make change happen and to implement aspects of work and our working environment that mean people are more able to actually enjoy, find work fulfilling and actually achieve outcomes that they're seeking. And it's that cumulative effect that drives performance and culture at the organisational level. So we're in that really exciting planning phase, and that'll happen over the next few weeks. And then we do a check-in every 4 months. We'll be checking in with the managers and their teams around how things are going. So it becomes part of our operating cycle of improvement, constant improvement. What are we tweaking and changing? And always within the accountability and the areas of responsibility for those work units. So what do we change to make our environment better? So it's a really deep piece of work. It pays dividends over quite a long period of time. But the important part from my perspective is that you engage people at all levels, you give them a voice, you listen to that voice and you make change happen. So we're really excited about it. And as Chris has said, we were nervous about the results. We've actually made some small achievements in terms of progress, and we can only see that getting faster and better going forward. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk to that.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask our consultant, Paul, to just add comment, and then we'll open it up to councillors, and that will be Andrew will be the first up. But Paul, would you like to just speak to this this paper and the results?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, Chris and Nick, I'm going to take the opportunity to be constructively rude here. So take this in the right spirit. So there's a thesis here, which is that you want a constructive style, that you defined it and that you've been working on it, and you made major progress between 2017 and 2019. And I think the graphs on page 12 demonstrate the real progress that was made there. But progress slowed markedly between 2019 and today. The paper suggests sort of that the slowdown in progress is a little COVID related, a little sector change related, a little economy and environmental factors kind of related. And you've got a mechanism for making change, which Nick described now as being about employee designed improvement, where in each directorate groups of people get to look at the results and they identify tactics that might make improvement. The next point I'd note is that the most stubborn area, or the area you've made the most progress, is this sort of passive defensive styles. You know, you're a lot more constructive, you are less aggressive, but there's this residual stubborn, hard to change passive defensive style. Let me offer you an alternative hypothesis on why we're stuck with that alternative, stuck with that passive defensive style. Let's say you've got 10 to 15 tier 3, tier 4 managers who are quite influential in their own area, and they are fundamentally deeply passive defensive people, right? They're highly conventional, they're approval dependent, they avoid change, resist innovation, suppress change, and mistake avoidant. I think it's quite plausible that you have a group of people like that. Now, if that is why your rate of change has slowed down, what culture change initiatives are you going to take that's going to get you past that? Because it seems to me that getting groups of employees to look at the results for their part of the business, where those individuals are important influences in the results of that exploration, isn't going to change the fact that you've got these 10 to 15 passive defensive resistors in your organisation. And you won't make change until you deal with them, or you won't pick up progress again till you deal with them. So that's my challenge, I suppose, to the scenario you've outlined for us.
Hey, Paul, I think they're great observations, because the richness of the data, we drill down, we can see different parts of the business, and you're quite right. Some parts of the business are much more constructive than others. Some parts are a little bit more passive defensive in particular than others, and that is what the results will show. And the beauty of this is it's how the staff perceive the culture of the organisation around them. It's not how others are telling them how it ought to be. And so by the staff being able to have discussions with their team leaders and the team leaders and their senior leadership teams with their section, with their directors and so on, that the richness of this discussion can come out. And there are some pockets of the organisation which, possibly due to the nature of the business or the types of the leadership styles in there, are I'd say more passive defensive than others, and they are areas we are going to work with and to help to try and grow those leaders to be better and more constructive leaders, as the staff would be wanting and expecting to see it. And I think by having to me, it's not a top-down remove the passive defensive people, it's how we grow them and how the staff can give that feedback to those leaders about that journey as well. Nick, you might want to, you may or may not want to expand on that.
I think that's what you've covered, Chris, is great. I think the only bits I'd add would be that we've got some quite strong values and behaviour sets, Paul, that we've articulated for people around expectations. They're incorporated into their both their position descriptions and also their goals that are set for them annually. So there is a number of tools we bring to bear on individuals that, for whatever reason, are producing results that we're not comfortable with. And so we will, for some cases, make those conversations quite tough. The work we're doing, though, happens at all levels. So organisationally, the ELT are looking also at the same data that at the organisation level that managers will look at for their own teams. And the ELT have visibility of the areas that we do have concerns about. And so there is, again, expectation coming through at that level. And also we're looking at what's driving those results. And there's a complementary set of data around what we call causal factors, the things that cause the results. And we've got metrics and data we use and we can apply to begin making changes. And where we see that passive defensive style in some areas, a lot of it's to do with job design, actually. So how we've actually put jobs together, what are the signals around what's important, how do we measure performance, what outcomes are assessed for those people. And so we can begin working on those at an organisational level too. So we approach it from multiple levels to try and find the fixes that we need. But I quite like your hypothesis. I think it's really helpful. and it shows a good understanding actually of the model we're trying to work in. And even if we progress dramatically as we did in the previous survey, there'll still be pockets where there are issues. And so we're very conscious of that. Equally, we've got some very strong performance in some areas, and we're actually also trying to leverage off them. So how do we take our really strong, highly constructive sections and teams, and how do we use that learning to actually inform the experience of other areas? And so equally, we try and role model the good as well as deal with the bad.
I could just add one comment to that. I guess that's, I suppose, what I'd expected to hear. But you've been saying to these people since 2017, we want you to let go of your passive defensive behaviours, and it's 2022 and they haven't got the message yet. Chris, I'm not sure they can all be saved, just to put a sharp point on it. Yeah. And how much longer will you give them?
There's an assumption it's the same people. Yeah. And I can think of some areas where it's not. It's probably just, I think that Nick's got a better way of describing it. It's about the job design, which has got a specific definition in the way it's done. Yeah. But in some cases, you might be right. In some cases, I know that it's not the person. There's something else going on about how the staff in that area perceive the culture.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I come to Andrea, just to follow on from that, Chris, I mean, when you came on board, we had a consultant and we let that organisation go through cost saving. We perhaps thought it was time for another look. What external consultants, apart from Paul, do we actually use? Like, we've got the Pulse survey, that's the end of that's a result. But what about the kind of the actually implementation to actually encourage better behavioural performance?
So just in terms of the organisation culture, we are using human synergistics still. So it's the same one from 2017. Okay. And what we've managed to do is train up a lot of capacity in the organisation, so we're less reliant on paying them to give us some of the advice. So we have a number of staff, Nick included, who are well trained and versed in it, and to build that leadership style. But we still use, for example, the executive team still uses Neil McGregor to give advice, and just make sure we're still focused and understand what we ought to be doing. Nick, any others?
I think that covers it. Yeah, I mean, there's a shift to internal capability in particular. It's a really important one. We wanted to own our culture, so we built the skills internally to do that. But we still need to make sure we get guidance from time to time. So we bring in the experts when we need to, but not only when we need to, basically.
Thanks, Nick. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I think we should applaud Paul's rudeness. He had a different term for it, but I think it's outstanding when a consultant adds debate like he's just added, because what I'm hearing him say is sometimes the only way to change people is change people. I guess, look, I really enjoyed this paper until I heard Paul's questions, and then I thought, yeah, shit, we've got to think a bit deeper about this. I guess, Paul, if I look at the preferred percentages that we're chasing, and I think about the aggressive defensive ones and the passive defensive ones, which I think are going to really yield results if we can make cultural modifications in that space, because the case studies you put up, Paul, I think they're alive and well, and Chris's one-liner to you that they're not always the same people. I couldn't see the tongue in his cheek, but I wouldn't mind betting that you've got some recidivist offenders in there that are, on the face of it, quite valuable, Chris, and we might think are too valuable to let go. But I'd like to understand how we can probe more on the challenge that that Paul's put to us, because he's changed my mind. You know, I looked at the results and said, well done, Nick, well done, Chris, we're on the right direction, pass the paper, move on. But I think we're being asked to think about this a little bit more deeper. So, Paul, if I could start my questioning with you. If you look at the passive defensive and aggressive defensive preferred percentage targets, and you look at the opportunities from 2017 to now, some of those are our preferred percentages are just over 10% of the start numbers, which seems like really good targets. So if you're right, are those targets right, or do you want to see those targets changed, or do you just want to see recidivist offenders walk to the door?
Look, I think in summary, it's closest to the latter. And if it's not walk them to the door, I'd show them the door. I think the real area is the passive defensive area, which is the classic way that bureaucrats in an organisation like this resist change. And I just want to link it with something very real, because a little later on we're going to be talking to something that is very close to Barry's heart in particular. We'll be talking about the KPIs, and we'll be talking about the corporate plan progress towards improved customer service and improved innovation. Now, these people are the rock on which that'll break if you're not careful, because they will be the ones who will find a way for that, for those suggestions not to be good suggestions, or find ways to slow down or frustrate it. And I know I'm generalising here, but I generalise just to make the point. But you know who those folks are by now. Nick and his team and Chris and the directors know who these folks are. I guess I'm just saying, if we want to resume the stellar progress that we were making between 27 and 2019, then you may have to at least show these folks the record of resistance, the need for change, and the consequences of not making change, and some time frame. And it won't apply to you will know who they are. I'm just suggesting that you're stalled, and you're probably stalled because of a number of recidivists who are going to find that it's not in their nature to change. So I think you've got to decide at what point you stop living in hope they will, and applying modest medicine in favour of something a bit more substantial. There'll be frustrated teams underneath some of these people too, who probably want to go a bit faster and see the boss as a barrier, and you've got to worry about turnover among those groups if you don't do something about it as well. So look, there's a fair bit of supposition in there, but I guess it's just an analysis that history's taught me is plausible for this situation.
Chair, could I just round out my comment in relation to that, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think what I'm hearing Paul tell us is sacred cows make the best hamburgers. My view of these people is that they've got very broad and deep skill sets, and they are so valuable to us in our mind that we couldn't possibly imagine a life without them. And in my CEO roles, I've been in this situation a number of times, and what I've learned is every time one of those people has been helped to leave an organisation, the people underneath them breathe a sigh of relief, and the change in the organisation is palpable. So I think through you, Chair, we should challenge our Chief Executive to think very carefully about the sage advice he's just been given from our consultant. Thank you.
He's made notes right through, and so has Nick. Barry, would you like to move, I'm not going to put it necessarily, but would you like to move the paper be received? And Pamela, would you like to second?
Absolutely. And moving that, I really support all the conversation, and I think that we shouldn't underestimate the change that's been achieved, and to mark time, well, to a degree we've marked time, but in a time when the people who are change driven are more likely to the people who've been leaving, and to hold the fort. Yes, it's time to move us forward again. So I really support all the discussion, and very pleased to move this motion. Thank you.
Pamela?
Yeah, I am happy to second. Just it's been a very interesting conversation to listen to, and certainly your comments there, Andrew, at the end. I have, in various roles that I've been, I have certainly seen that play out as well. Just wondering if Nick or Chris or Paul wanted to make any any comment about, I see you working really hard to improve the culture within the organization. I see in the paper references to leadership being a key contributor and constructive culture being, more effective in producing higher levels of performance. Just wondering if any of you wanted to make any comment about how culture around the governance table may help or hinder what the efforts that you're undertaking within with regard to the culture within the organization.
Excellent question. Governance, hard help. We hinder help.
Of course, when staff respond to these, that's the organisation that they're in, and of course they will be partly a reflectance of how they perceive the culture, which drives down from the top, drives down from the governance table all the way through. Hey, look, that's another thing that's been challenging here, in the last year or so, and of course this came on the back of in December when there's a lot of political matters going on. In fear of being accused of trying to make excuses, I won't go any further there, but I think the culture is the organisation. The organisation is the governance and the staff. It's the leadership that's driven from the top, and it's also the leadership that's driven by any individual in the organisation. The thing that we keep reminding people, you are part of the organisation. You affect the culture by your very being in it. And so every individual in the organisation has got a reflection in these results in one way or another. Usually it's a little bit closer to them, how they reflect their culture, but it's a very relevant question, Councillor Story.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Just from my viewpoint, just say from the front desk, Chris, I can just see when you make a call and I put on different phones and so they don't pick, it's myself to identify. And, I think from that end, someone's getting it right because they're polite. They ensure that I am appropriately put to the right kind of person, maybe a farm matter or something like that. And I'm not just put on hold or disconnected like many, many councils in this area that are should hang their heads in shame. This organisation, they make certain they actually do get a human voice, and they answer the phones promptly and courteously, and they seem to be able to position the question to the appropriate person. That's small, but it's important because that's right at the front door. From the area of Paul, I'm talking, we're obviously an enforcer as well. And that's not necessarily easy when you actually end up by fining a farmer $100,000. We don't do the fine, the judge will set that fine, but some of them are pretty high. Well, in my mind they are. And again, we're an enforcer as well as a kind of a teacher, a leader. So, you're trying to walk down both sides of the street at the same time. And that's improved in time because I think the success that we've been having after all else has failed in the courts has been very, very good indeed. That's the way I read it, and the reports back that I see from farming groups, etc. Whereas at one time, 3 years ago, they're really up in arms talking about the feds. So particularly that group, the enforcement group, I think have got to be complimented. The motion has been on the floor. It's moved by Councillor Quayle, seconded by Councillor Story. All those in favour that it be received, say aye. Those against, carried. Mr. Day, we need to have a resolution to go into the publicly excluded section of this meeting, and that is on your screens. It's moved by?
Happy to move.
Moved by Councillor Story.
Happy to second.
Councillor Mcpherson seconds it. Dave, do I need to read it out? It's in the agenda, so I'm quite lawful. I therefore put it for the reasons that are outlined in the paper and on the screen. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. That we go into the publicly excluded session of this meeting. The first item that is Janine.
No, it would be me.